So you've got yourself a piece of property, or you just bought a piece of property, and now you're thinking about what kind of dwelling you want and how you want to build it. Whether it's a cabin or a cottage or a home to move into, or maybe it's a home for retirement in a few years, there's a lot of things to consider and to think about. And of course, that's led to dozens of questions from folks asking me why I built things the way I did, the things I considered, why I didn't do one thing versus another, and some of the decisions I made and what led to those decisions. So as I promised, I wanted to take a few minutes, go over some of the things that I thought through, some of the reasons I built the way I built or the decisions I made, and hopefully that's helpful for you folks to consider as you're trying to plan out what you want to build on your property. Oh, and hey, for the purpose of the video today, I'm going to assume that you've got a piece of property. It's either 2 acres or 200 acres, and it's situated in some rural or remote area. And as is always the case, decisions that I've made might have been good for me or on hindsight may not have been good. But the point of the video is not to suggest to you what you should do. It's to hopefully provide some information for you to consider as you plan what is right for you and your family. Hope you'll stick around. Cheers. So the most important piece of advice I can give you before you begin your planning is to plan your build for when you're 75 years old. So regardless of whether you're 20, 30, or 50 years old, think about what you want or you think you need life to be like when you're in your 70s. That doesn't necessarily mean you're going to build right away that way. But what it will do is it'll give you a little bit of foresight so that you plan ahead or you prep the house or the dwelling for what you may need to change later. And I'll give you a simple example. As you folks know, this is my cottage. I'm here pretty much every week for a few days, but I don't live here yet. But regardless, in the event that I do decide to move up here permanently, I had them rough in for a washer and dryer and a laundry tub in my utility room. I don't have a washer and dryer, but I have a feeling or a strong feeling that at some point I'm going to need to put one in. Another example is heat. If you think about it, we're all enamored by having a big, beautiful wood stove or maybe 2 wood stoves in your home, beautiful fire in the background, going out every day, grabbing wood, bringing it in, that nice smell or aroma of burning elm or maple. But at some point, whether it's due to health reasons or just for the simple fact that at some point in the future, you just don't want to run out in negative 20 degrees Celsius weather to get firewood every day, you may want a furnace. So keeping that in mind, you may find that when you plan your build, you may not put in a furnace right away, but it's a whole lot cheaper and cost effective to have the ductwork and the piping and the plenum all pre-installed in the home, so that when the time comes, you just have to put a furnace in and connect it. So first step, take a look at your property survey. Make sure you have a reasonably current survey that shows where your property lines are. Make sure that you can find the monuments or the big iron rods in the ground. And if it's not a current survey, I'd highly recommend that you get the surveyors in, proper licensed or certified surveyors, to come in and verify that your markers are where they're supposed to be, so you know exactly what property is yours and what belongs to your neighbors. You folks will probably remember that I finally got a survey done on this property last summer, and I'll put a link to it here. Found out a lot of interesting pieces of information because I couldn't find several of my monuments or markers on my property. So of course I was estimating all these years as to what was mine and what was my neighbor's. Turned out I had more property than I thought I did, but more importantly, I was able to find all those markers, and I now know exactly where the property lines are, and I've marked them out. And you'll remember from that survey video, the surveyors had told me that they are regularly run into issues between neighbors where maybe 10, 20, 30 years ago, somebody moved a monument and changed the property lines without the knowledge of the neighbor beside them. Or people have built buildings or outbuildings that have crossed over property lines because it wasn't clearly marked. Best to start off knowing exactly what's yours and what's not yours. So you've got an accurate land survey, you know what's yours, and you're thinking about where you want to site your building or your dwelling. Check into your local bylaws. You're going to find most likely that there are a lot of bylaws that you need to be aware of before you start to plan that build. You're going to find bylaws or setback bylaws for how close a building can be to a property line, how close an outbuilding can be, where you can and cannot put a septic tank or a well. If you've got water or a river that runs through your property, there's probably environmental setbacks that disallow you from building too close to those water or those environmental areas. And the biggest surprise I found with the bylaws here was there's actually restrictions and conditions on how many square feet or how large that dwelling can be relative to your size of property, how many acres you own. So you're looking at your lot plan, you're starting to think of ideas of where you want to put the dwelling, and that leads to the question of the driveway and how far from the road you want to be. So a few things to consider about the driveway. One, you probably, if you're like me, you don't want your home or your dwelling too close to the concession road. You want to be far enough away that you've got a little isolation, a little bit of privacy, especially if you've got a little bit of a forest. You probably want your driveway to meander through that forest to get down to your dwelling. That way people can't drive by and look down your driveway and see what you're doing. And more importantly, you want to be far enough away that you're a little bit sheltered from all the traffic or the noise of the traffic. I'd offer that here, as you know, I've got a driveway that's almost a mile long through the forest. It's a beautiful drive in and out, but boy, on the other hand, it takes a lot of maintenance every year, whether it's clearing it in the wintertime or grading it and maintaining parts of the driveway every summer. It's a lot of work to keep that driveway fit. However, beautiful view on the way in and out. Second important point about a driveway is I think you need to consider two driveways. If you ever see me on the channel and I'm over at my neighbor Guy's place or Alfred's or Ben's, etc., you probably haven't noticed, but they actually have two separate driveways into their dwelling from different parts of their property. And there's a couple of reasons for that. You're surrounded by forest. If you've got one driveway in and out and you end up with a forest fire or some other tragedy, you're blocked from getting your family to safety. The second side of that coin is you're also limiting the ability for first responders to get into you. You're also going to want to consider putting a gate on those driveways for a couple of reasons. If you're going to insure the home or the property and your assets on the home, you may not realize it, but your insurance policy is going to require that you have some reasonable care of the equipment and the home. AKA, you need a gate or something to lock the driveway when you're not home. If you've got property like I do here, that means not only do you have the home that's going to be locked, but you're going to have equipment, whether it's a lawn tractor, a lawnmower, different types of equipment and things on the property, and they need to be secured under your insurance policy. Without a gate, nothing's stopping anybody from coming down your driveway, hooking up your tractor or picking up your boat and taking off with it. And in the event that that occurs, at least here in Ontario, highly probable the insurance company will deny the claim. So it's important to put a gate in. One of the decisions that I wish, looking back now, I had made differently was the grade of the building relative to the ground. Of course, it was important to me back then to have the cottage graded down. When they came in and they excavated the foundation, they found, as is pretty much the case with anywhere around here in this part of Ontario, there's a big granite rock shelf that runs underneath, and it's a shallow rock shelf. So they gave me the option of either raising it up and changing my mind, building up a higher foundation to get the cottage off the ground and to build a basement where I could walk around, or to leave it as originally planned, which meant that I now had a crawl space instead of a basement under this cottage. Looking back, wish I had raised the building. That simple decision ended up resulting in a couple of unforeseen challenges. The first is that it's a small building, and I have no storage in this building except one small utility room on the main floor. Now that I only have a crawl space, I have no storage down there. Plus, now that I've gotten older, in order to get down to change my furnace filter or do any maintenance or work on the water filtration system or replace a UV bulb or any other type of maintenance I need to do to my utilities, I've got to pull a trap door out of the floor, jump down on top of the rock, and crawl through the basement on my hands and knees. Wasn't a big deal way back, but it certainly, as I've gotten older and the old back's not what it used to be and the knees aren't what they are, crawling around on your hands and knees on a granite rock shelf wouldn't have been my first choice. The other challenge was my septic bed. Just like the house, we've got a lot of rock here, so my septic bed is actually raised. Had I lifted this foundation up 3-4 feet, I would have been able to gravity feed my sewage into the septic tank. Because I didn't raise the house, I ended up having to pay and have installed a sewage pump. Not the worst thing, but remember, I'm on solar power here. Pump draws a lot of power when it turns on. Doesn't turn on often and it doesn't run for too long, but it draws a big load when it does. Not to mention I have a future maintenance or replacement issue to consider. So looking back in retrospect, probably not the best decision. I think you're going to want electricity. The good news is you have more than one choice now. Solar system technology has come a long way, and in the last 15 years, the prices have dropped pretty significantly. Here in Ontario, and most likely where you live, if you've got a dwelling that's anywhere more than about 100 feet off of the road, All of the costs associated with the engineering, design, the build, the installation, labor, materials, and equipment for you to get hydro distribution cables down your property to your dwelling will be 100% borne by you. So in considering the build, you probably, in my view, want to do two things. You want to contact your local utility, and you want them to come out and get you a rough estimate of what the cost will be for you to bring grid-tied utility electricity down to your dwelling. But the second option you have now is you want to contact 3 different solar companies and have each of the 3 of them come in and quote you the cost of a solar system for your dwelling based on your needs. When you get those quotes from the utility and those solar providers, you may be pleasantly surprised that you have a viable option. Because in the past, even though you'd have to pay to bring that distribution cable down through your property to your home, usually it was common practice that the utility would assume that distribution cable in that build thereafter, which meant that if a tree fell on the line or you had a power outage, part of your monthly service charge is that they'd come out and they'd fix it and repair and get you back in service. That policy has changed quite a bit over the last few years, and now it's more than likely, at least here in Ontario, that not only are you going to pay to build it to get it installed, and I'm talking trucks, putting poles in the ground, all the equipment and running the cabling, the whole 9 yards, but after the fact, they're less likely now to assume that build, which means that going forward in the future, if you get a tree on the line or there's an outage, they'll cut your service off at the road, but it's 100% your liability and responsibility to contact a contractor to come in, find the outage, fix it, all at your cost, before they'll come back and flip the switch to allow the power to run down to your dwelling. On the other hand, an engineered solar system, and I mean a full system, like I have here, panels, storage and batteries, and a backup generator, might be just what you need if it's properly engineered for your power needs or your electricity supply needs. One of the nice benefits of solar, of course, is that you're not subject to power outages. And if you live in a rural or a remote community, similar to the folks down here on this concession road, your power goes out on a regular basis because you've literally got hundreds of miles of transmission and distribution cables running through forests. There's always a tree down or something that puts the power out, whether it's for a few hours or a few days. The solar system, especially if you've got a properly designed system with backup energy, you don't run out of power. But when you do that assessment of costs, make sure you're looking at the longer term costs because, for example, the batteries that are storing your energy will not last forever. There'll be a life cycle on those batteries, which means at some point in the future, whether it's 10 or 12 years from now, you're going to have to replace those batteries. So you want to kind of look at the maintenance and the forward costs of the solar system versus the cost of bringing in your utility grid tie, as well as your regular monthly bills, which you won't have when you have a solar system. You also need to consider what you want to do about sewage and waste. When I was in my 20s, this probably would have been okay. But I knew that at some point, running out in the middle of the night in negative 20-degree weather was probably not going to sit well with me. So I had a choice. I could have left the outhouse, or I could have put in a septic bed. And I chose for the long haul, with all things considered, that it was better to get the septic system put in to feed my plumbing inside the house. You also have to consider how you want to feed your dwelling with water. In my case, I had a few options because I'm on a lake. I could have used a gravity-fed cistern where I'd have a line run down to the lake and I'd have to use a pump and a generator on a regular basis to fill the cistern up and then have it gravity-fed to the house. But that had its long-term effects as well. At some point, I don't want to go outside trying to pump water up, especially in the wintertime, because that in and of itself poses a lot of issues. Another option I had was I could have fed a line into the lake permanently, put a water line heater into it, fed it into the house and pumped it in with a pump inside the house. However, now I'm taking lake water in, which means I have to treat it differently and make sure it's treated. May or may not be potable. And as well, because we have such severe winters here, you stand a much better chance of having water line freezing. And that's never pretty in the wintertime. The third option, which is the one I chose and I would choose again, is I spent the money to have a well dug. I got excellent water pressure out of this well, plus the well water all on its own is potable. Even though the municipal tests proved the water to be potable, I still chose to put an ultraviolet filter in the basement as well as an iron filter. And just for the family, I put a water softener in. I still get excellent pressure out of that well to this day, and I don't have any of the other issues or challenges as far as trying to draw water out of the lake, one of the other two ways. So at the end of the day, if I had to choose again, I'd do the same thing again. It was worth every dollar. I also wanted to mention a couple of things that if I had the choice to do, I would have done differently now, years later. I never would have put shingles on that roof. I would have put a steel roof in. And I know some people say, well, with a steel roof, you're going to hear the pitter-patter of the rain when it rains, and it's a little louder or a little noisier. But the beautiful thing about having a steel roof is you have no maintenance in the future. The siding on the building, same kind of thing as the roof. Every 12 to 15 years, I'm going to have to get this thing sanded down, restained, and resealed. If I'd put in some nice high-quality vinyl siding, it'll last forever. Now granted, I'm still back and forth about it because it certainly is a beautiful finish on the side of the house and certainly much nicer than vinyl siding. But at the end of the day, as you look forward into the future, once again, if I'm in my 70s, do I want to be spending thousands of dollars on a cyclic basis? I don't. And my biggest regret is that I didn't build a garage at the same time I built the cottage. They asked me about it. I considered it on and off, but I was also trying to manage the budget and the money at the time, and I didn't want to overextend too much. But looking back now, all these years later, I still don't have the garage built. And at the time, I had the excavator, had all the tradesmen, the carpenter, everybody was here. Probably would have cost me a lot less overall to just have them build the garage at the same time they put the cottage in, as opposed to now having to recontract for somebody to come in and start from scratch. I've had so many people ask me why I chose to use a propane furnace to heat this cottage as opposed to heating with wood, be it a wood stove or a boiler or some other solution. And it's simple, it's a cottage. I don't live here all the time, so I'm not here all the time to keep the fire stoked. And when I am away and I come back, especially in the middle of the winter, it takes a long time to stoke up a stove or a boiler and to get heat flowing through that house. And as I've gotten older, I just don't want to put up with the cold. I'd rather have instant heat when I need it. If I'd planned on living here full time, I probably would have for sure roughed in all the plenum and the venting for the furnace, but I might have chosen either a boiler or some other wood-based solution for my heat. Okay, I think I've covered off all of the questions I've received, or at least the majority of them. I hope it's been helpful for you good folks that have property and are starting to think about what kind of a dwelling or a home you want to build. Thanks so much for sticking around with me today. If you like the channel, please click subscribe, hit the like button, and if you want to know when I'm posting videos, just click that little bell. Good luck with your property and your home builds. It's an exciting time, and I wish you all the best. Cheers.